The storm that shouldn't exist, the sea, had been calm when Captain Ellis left port that morning. The sky was clear, the wind gentle, and the old fishing trawler Marlin's Grace cut through the water without trouble. By midday, they were more than 30 miles from shore, hauling in nets heavy with cod. But then the weather changed. It began with a faint rumble, like distant thunder, though the sky above was still bright. The crew looked around, confused. The horizon, once blue, had turned an unnatural shade of green. "Storm coming?" asked First Mate Ryan, squinting into the distance. Captain Ellis shook his head. There was nothing on the forecast. The wind picked up, cold and sharp, and the sea began to churn. Within minutes, walls of black clouds rolled across the sky, swallowing the sunlight. By the time the first bolt of lightning split the air, the Marlin's Grace was already fighting for its life. Rain came down in sheets, hammering the deck. Waves rose higher than the ship's wheelhouse, crashing over the bow. Ellis gripped the wheel, trying to keep them steady, but something about the storm felt wrong. The compass spun wildly, refusing to point north. The radios crackled with static, then went completely silent. "Everything's dead," Ryan shouted over the wind. No signal. The other crew members clung to the railings, their faces pale with fear through the chaos. Ellis saw it, a beam of light slicing through the storm. It swept across the waves in a slow, steady arc, coming from somewhere ahead. A lighthouse. Relief washed over him for a moment, until he remembered there shouldn't be a lighthouse here, not in this part of the North Atlantic. He knew these waters well, and there was nothing but open sea for miles. Still, the beam cut through the storm like a lifeline. An instinct told him to follow it. As they drew closer, the beam grew brighter, almost blinding. The waves seemed to pull them toward it, the currents changing direction without warning. Ellis tried to steer away, but the wheel resisted in his hands, as if something unseen was forcing the ship forward. "Cap, we're headed straight for rocks," Ryan yelled. Ellis turned the wheel hard to port. Nothing. It was like the ship no longer obeyed him. The light flashed across them again, and for just a second, Ellis saw something in the lighthouse window. A shadow. It was tall, too tall for a man, and unmoving, standing in perfect stillness against the glass. Then came the whispers. At first, he thought it was the wind, carrying fragments of voices from the deck. But no one was speaking. The whispers were coming from all around, from the water, from the air, even from inside his own head. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent, almost pleading. Ryan looked at him with wide eyes. "Do you hear that?" "Before?" Ellis could answer. A massive wave slammed into the side of the trawler. The deck tilted violently, throwing 2 crew members into the sea. They didn't even scream. They were just gone, swallowed by the black water. The ship struck something solid with a bone-shaking crash. Wood splintered, metal groaned, and the deck tilted again as water poured in through a jagged hole in the hull. Ellis was thrown to the floor, his head striking the railing. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was the beam of light sweeping across the deck, and that shadow in the window still watching. When he awoke, everything was silent. The rain had stopped. The storm was gone. He was lying on wet sand, the taste of salt heavy in his mouth. Slowly, he sat up. Ryan was nearby, coughing seawater, his face pale and shaking. A few other crew members were scattered along the shore, but the Marlin's Grace was gone. There was no wreckage, no debris, as if it had never existed. Ellis took in his surroundings. They were on a rocky island, surrounded by steep cliffs. The air was heavy with mist, making it impossible to see more than a few hundred feet. And there it was, the lighthouse. It stood on the highest point of the island, its black stone walls glistening with moisture. The beam swept lazily across the sea, though the sky was now clear and calm. The door at the base of the lighthouse hung slightly open, swaying with the breeze. As they gathered, the survivors tried to make sense of what had happened. "We must Be near the coast, Ryan said, though his voice lacked conviction. Ellis shook his head. No, I've sailed these waters my whole life. This island isn't on any chart. One of the younger crewmen, Mateo, pointed toward the lighthouse. We should go there. Maybe there's a radio. Ellis hesitated. Every instinct told him to stay away from that place. But they had no food, no fresh water, and no sign of rescue. The only way forward was toward the light. The closer they got, the stranger things became. The ground was littered with old ropes, rusted anchors, and shattered pieces of wooden boats, all rotting as if they had been here for decades. And yet, there were no gulls, no insects, no smell of decay. The air was too still. When they reached the door, Ellis pushed it open. The hinges creaked loudly in the silence. Inside, the air was warm, with the faint smell of burning oil. But the great lamp at the top was not lit. No flame, no bulb, nothing that could produce the light they'd seen. In the corner of the room, a desk sat covered in dust. On it lay a stack of logbooks, their pages yellowed and curling with age. Ellis picked one up and flipped through it. Most of the entries were ordinary notes about the weather, the tides, and passing ships. But near the end, the handwriting grew shaky, and the same sentence appeared over and over. The light must stay on, or they will come. Ellis closed the book slowly. Ryan looked at him, frowning. They? Who's they? Before Ellis could answer, the beam of the lighthouse swept past the window again, and in its glow, far out on the water, dozens of small reflections appeared, like eyes, watching. The mist clung to the island like a living thing, curling around the rocks and hiding the horizon. From the lighthouse balcony, Captain Ellis could see only gray in every direction. There was no sign of land, no sign of ships, nothing but the slow, endless movement of the waves. But what disturbed him most was the silence. No gulls circled above. No wind stirred the grass. The only sound was the steady rotation of the lighthouse beam, though impossibly. It shone without a lamp. Ryan leaned on the railing, scanning the water. This isn't right, he muttered. I've sailed these waters 100 times. This island isn't here. It never has been. Ellis didn't answer. He didn't need to. They were all thinking the same thing. If this place wasn't on any map, where had it come from? The survivors gathered in the main room of the lighthouse. There were 6 of them left. Ellis, Ryan, Mateo, 2 older deckhands, named Burke and Hansen, and a quiet young woman named Leela, who had been hitching a ride back to the mainland when the storm struck. They searched the lower levels, looking for supplies. The kitchen was empty except for a single rusty kettle and a shelf lined with glass jars filled with cloudy, unidentifiable liquid. The pantry doors were nailed shut from the outside in the storage room. They found oil lamps, ropes, and tools, but no sign of a generator, no wiring, no fuel, and yet, the light above kept turning. On the second floor, Burke found a room filled with old logbooks, maps, and faded photographs. Most of the maps showed the North Atlantic, but in all of them, the island they were standing on simply didn't exist. The photographs were worse. They showed different groups of people standing in front of the lighthouse, sailors, fishermen, even soldiers. The strange thing was that the photos were all taken decades apart, but the lighthouse looked exactly the same, down to the smallest crack in the wall, and in every photo. One figure stood apart from the others, tall, thin, and wearing a dark coat. His face was always turned slightly away, so his features were hidden. Mateo opened one of the logbooks and began reading aloud. The early entries were dull, descriptions of weather, notes on passing ships, but then the tone changed. The light must remain. The things in the water grow bolder when the beam slows. Another entry: they test the walls at night. The sound is worse than the sight. And finally, the last keeper before me screamed until morning. By sunrise, there was nothing left of him. Mateo closed the book, his hands shaking slightly. Who wrote this? And what was he talking about? No one answered out. Outside, the mist thickened, wrapping the island in a suffocating shroud. It was impossible to tell the time. The light never changed. The sky never brightened or darkened. Ryan paced near the window. We should explore the island. There might be another building, a dock, something. Ellis agreed, though every part of him wanted to stay inside. Something about the open air here felt wrong, like they were being watched. They set out along a narrow rocky path that wound down toward the shoreline. The rocks were slick, and in places, covered in strange pale growths that looked like coral, though they were miles from any reef. Halfway down, Lila stopped suddenly. "Do you hear that?" They all listened. At first, there was nothing. Then, faintly, came a sound like wet fabric dragging across stone. It was coming from somewhere below them. When they reached the beach, they saw it, a shipwreck, half buried in the sand. It was old, its wooden hull split open, seaweed clinging to its broken masts. But what made Ellis's stomach twist was the name painted on the side in faded letters. Marlin's Grace, their ship. They approached slowly, their boots sinking into the wet sand. The hull was cracked open, and inside, they could see their fishing nets, their gear. Even Ellis's old captain's chair, all waterlogged and rotting. This isn't possible," Burke whispered. "It sank hours ago." The sound was slow, heavy, one step at a time. It came from above them, in the lighthouse tower. Everyone froze, their eyes darting toward the spiral staircase. The steps were made of old iron, each one groaning under the weight of whoever, or whatever, was walking on them. Ellis swallowed hard. They had searched the lower levels earlier. They'd found no one. So who was upstairs now? Ryan grabbed an oil lamp from the table, its dim glow casting long shadows on the walls. "Stay here," he whispered. Ellis shook his head. "We go." Together, slowly, they began to climb. The footsteps above them stopped. The silence was almost worse than the sound. Every step they took made the iron staircase creak, echoing through the tower. The smell of burning oil grew stronger the higher they climbed, though they still saw no light from above. Halfway up, they reached the keeper's quarters, a small room with a bed, a desk, and a single window facing the sea. The bed was neatly made. The desk was covered in dust, except for one object, a brass key, polished and shining as if it had been handled just minutes ago. On the wall hung an old black coat, long and heavy. It swayed slightly, though there was no breeze. Ryan reached for the coat. Ellis grabbed his arm. "Don't touch it." They left the room, continuing up toward the lamp room. The final door at the top was made of thick oak. It was closed, but a faint humming sound came from the other side, deep, low, and constant, like a vibration in the air. Ellis slowly pushed it open. The lamp room was empty. No lamp, no bulb, no flame. Just a wide glass lens, rotating on its own, sweeping the beam over the ocean. The humming seemed to come from the lens itself, as if it were alive. Ryan stepped forward, staring out through the glass. "Ellis," he said softly, "you need to see this." Ellis joined him at the window. The beam passed over the waves, and there they were again. Eyes, dozens of pairs, glowing faintly in the dark water far below. They didn't blink, they didn't move, they just watched. Then the beam moved on, and the eyes vanished into the dark. As they turned to leave, a loud clang rang out from below, followed by Burke shouting in panic. They raced down the stairs two at a time. In the main room, Burke and Lila were backed into a corner, staring at the front door. It was wide open. The mist outside curled into the doorway, like fingers reaching into the room. And on the wet stone, just inside the threshold, were footprints, bare feet, still wet, leading from the door. To the base of the staircase they had just come down. Hansen appeared from the storage room, his face pale. It was locked, he whispered. I swear I bolted it. Ellis knelt and touched the wet prints. They were cold, fresh. Everyone stays together, he said firmly. No one leaves this room. Not for anything. The night dragged on in tense silence. They took turns keeping watch, while the others tried to rest on the floor. At some point, Ellis dozed off. He woke to Ryan shaking him. Listen, Ryan whispered. At first, Ellis heard nothing. Then it came faint, rhythmic, almost like breathing. It was coming from upstairs. The sound grew louder, like someone pacing slowly in the lamp room. Step, step, step. Then it stopped. They all sat frozen, staring at the staircase. And then, in the absolute stillness, a voice drifted down from above. Low, slow, indistinct. It might have been speaking a language none of them knew. Or it might not have been human at all. Whatever it was, it made the hair on the back of Ellis's neck stand on end. Suddenly, the beam outside swept over the water, and a crash of thunder boomed in the distance, though the sky had been clear a moment before Mateo stumbled to the window and gasped. They're closer, he said. Ellis joined him. The eyes in the water weren't far away anymore. They were only a few 100 meters from shore, and now there were more of them, hundreds, stretching as far as the light could reach. The pacing upstairs began again, faster this time. Then the sound of something being dragged across the floor above. Something heavy. Burke grabbed an axe from the wall. If it comes down, we fight. But nothing came down. Instead, the dragging stopped, and a faint tapping began on the glass. Windows. It wasn't from inside, it was from outside. They crept to the windows and peered out into the mist. At first, they saw nothing. Then something shifted in the fog, tall, thin shapes moving along the edge of the beach, their outlines just visible in the lighthouse beam. The tapping came again, now from the next window over, then the next, moving around the building. The shapes in the fog stopped, and in the silence, Ellis heard it again, that wet whisper from the beach, only this time, it was right outside the wall. The whisper outside faded, replaced by the slow scrape of something moving along the outer wall. It circled the lighthouse, the sound dragging in the mist. No one spoke. No one dared breathe too loud. Then silence. It was gone, but silence in this place felt worse than any noise. Ellis motioned for everyone to stay put while he checked the storage room again. As he stepped inside, a strange smell hit him, damp stone and something like rotting seaweed. He lifted the oil lamp higher, scanning the room. That's when he noticed it. A section of the far wall was different. The stone there was newer, not as weathered. He ran his hand along the surface, and it gave a hollow sound. A door. It was locked, with a thick chain and a padlock. But the key, the brass key they had found upstairs, seemed like it might fit. Ryan joined him, and together they unlocked it. The door swung open with a slow groan. Behind it was a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The air from below was warm and damp, and carried a faint hum, the same low vibration they had heard in the lamp room. Ellis hesitated. Something about this felt wrong, but if there was a basement, maybe there was a generator, maybe even supplies. They descended. The staircase ended in a single stone chamber, lit by a single flickering oil lamp, and in the corner, chained to the wall, sat a man. He was old, far older than anyone they'd ever seen, with a face like worn leather, and eyes clouded with age. His hair was long and white, and his skin had a sickly gray tint. But despite his condition, he sat upright, his gaze fixed on them. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice dry and brittle. Ellis exchanged a glance with Ryan. "Who are you?" The old man gave a weak laugh. "The last one, the last keeper." "The lighthouse keeper?" Ryan asked. The old man nodded slowly. "For 53 years. Ellis stepped forward. "What is this place?" The keeper's eyes narrowed. "You saw them, didn't you? Out in the water?" Ellis nodded. What are they? The keeper's voice dropped to a whisper. They're older than the sea. They wait for the light to die. If it goes out, they come. And when they come, nothing on this island survives. Ryan frowned. What are you talking about? Creatures. The keeper turned his gaze toward the ceiling, as if he could see straight up to the lamp room. They come when the beam stops. It's the only thing they fear. Ellis stepped closer. Fear? What do they do? The keeper's face grew tight, his lips trembling. They take, and they never give back. Not bodies, not bones, nothing. For a long moment, no one spoke. The old man's chains rattled slightly as he shifted. Why are you chained down here? Ellis finally asked. The keeper's eyes darkened. Because I tried to leave. He gave a weak, bitter laugh. You don't get to leave. Once you're brought here, the island decides if you stay. And the light always needs a keeper. Before Ellis could respond, a loud bang echoed from above, followed by Leela screaming. They raced upstairs, taking the steps two at a time. In the main room, the front door was wide open again, mist pouring in like smoke. Burke was standing near the wall, pale and shaking, holding a fire axe. They tried to come in, he stammered. Something pushed on the door, hard. I thought it was going to break. Ellis slammed the door shut and bolted it. The mist outside swirled violently, as if angry at being shut out. They regrouped, telling the others about the man in the basement. No one liked the idea of someone being locked up down there for decades. But the words he'd spoken stayed with them. The light must stay on. Mateo moved to the window and froze. They're closer, he said quietly. Ellis joined him. The eyes in the water were no longer far out at sea. They were right at the shoreline now, swaying slightly, as if whatever they belonged to was just beneath the surface. Suddenly, the lighthouse beam stuttered. It slowed for just a second, and every eye in the water dipped under the surface at the same time. They're moving, Mateo whispered. Ellis's stomach tightened. Upstairs. Now. They ran to the lamp room. The lens was still rotating, but the humming was weaker. Ellis looked around for any sign of a power source, but there was nothing. No wires, Ryan muttered. No engine. How the hell is this thing running? Before anyone could answer, the hum faltered again. The beam slowed, and then stopped. The light went out. For the first time since they'd arrived, the lamp room was in complete darkness. Then, they heard it, a deep, rushing sound, like something enormous moving through the water toward the island, from far below. The keeper's voice echoed up the stairs, loud and urgent. You've let it die? They're coming for all of you now. The moment the light went out, the air changed. It grew heavy, pressing against their chests like deep water. The silence was broken by a low rolling sound, not thunder, but something alive. Then came the wind. It roared through the island. In an instant, ripping the mist apart and replacing it with black clouds that swirled unnaturally above. Rain slammed against the lighthouse glass as if the sky itself had been torn open. But the rain wasn't the worst part. From far below, through the roar of the storm, came the first scream. It wasn't human. Ellis grabbed the railing of the lamp room, staring down at the shoreline. The eyes were gone, but the water churned like it was boiling. Waves surging toward the rocks. Shapes moved beneath the surface, huge. Shadowy forms, longer than any ship, twisting and coiling as they rose. Ryan backed away from the window. They're coming up. Another scream split the air, this one closer. It made Ellis's teeth ache and his stomach turn, as if the sound had weight. The front door below slammed open again, even though they had locked it. Mist and rain burst inside. Leela's voice rang out from the main room. There at the door. Help me close it. Ellis and Ryan raced down, nearly slipping on the wet stairs. In the doorway, Leela struggled to push it shut, as something pressed against it from outside, something strong, enough to make the hinges groan. Through the narrow gap, Ellis saw a hand. At least, it looked like a hand at first. Pale, slick with seawater, with fingers far too long. Each fingertip ended in a curved black hook. The hand slid higher on the door, and another joined it, pressing harder. Burke swung his axe, slamming it into the gap. The hooked fingers withdrew instantly, and a hiss like steam filled the air. The door slammed shut. They shoved the heavy iron bolt back into place. Everyone was breathing hard, their eyes wide. "We need that light back on," Ellis said. "If it stays dark, they'll come through." "How?" Mateo demanded. "There's no engine, no wiring. That thing, it's not even powered." Ellis didn't answer. Instead, he looked toward the staircase leading down to the basement. The keeper. They found him sitting exactly as before, the chains rattling softly as he looked up at them. "It's gone out, hasn't it?" he said. Ellis nodded. "How do we restart it?" The keeper's face twisted into something between a smile and a grimace. "You don't start it, you feed it." Ryan frowned. "Feed it? With what?" "Fuel." The keeper shook his head slowly. "Blood." A loud crash above made the ceiling dust rain down on them. It sounded like something enormous had slammed against the outer wall. "They're testing the stone," the keeper said calmly. "They'll break through soon." Ellis stepped forward. "What do you mean, blood?" The old man's cloudy eyes locked on his. "It's not a lamp, it's a seal. The light keeps them bound under the water. It drinks life to burn, always has. That's why the keeper never leaves." Mateo's voice shook. "You're saying we have to kill someone?" The keeper didn't blink. "Not someone. Anyone. Enough blood to wake the lens again." Another crash, this one louder, shook the entire lighthouse. Somewhere upstairs, glass shattered. The sound of water rushing in followed. Ryan looked at Ellis. "If we don't, we're all dead." Burke's grip tightened on the axe. "And who exactly are we supposed to feed it with?" No one spoke. The only sound was the storm outside and the faint scraping of claws on stone. Ellis turned to the keeper. "You've been here 53 years. Why not feed it yourself?" The old man chuckled weakly. "I already have. Too many times. That's why I'm still alive. But I don't have enough left to wake it now." He looked at them all in turn. "One of you does." Another boom shook the walls. The storm was so loud now that it was hard to hear each other speak. Lila's voice rose over the wind. "They're on the roof." They all looked up. The sound of claws scraped against the metal dome above the lamp room, sharp and deliberate. Mateo backed toward the stairs. "We need to decide now." Ellis's jaw clenched. "If it takes blood, then we'll give it. But no one dies unless there's no other choice." The keeper laughed softly. "You don't understand. It's always a choice." Without warning, a section of the roof gave way with a metallic scream. Something long and black slithered through the gap, dripping seawater. The stench was overpowering, salt, rot, and something older. The thing twisted, and in the flicker of the oil lamps, they saw rows of teeth, glistening like wet glass. "Upstairs," Ellis shouted. They bolted for the lamp room. The creatures screeched, chasing them. The lens sat still, dead and cold. Outside the shattered glass, the black shapes in the water swayed closer to the rocks, more of them rising every second. Ellis grabbed the base of the lens. It was warm, pulsing, almost like a heartbeat. He looked back at the others. "We have to try." Ryan nodded grimly. "I'll do it." Before anyone could stop him, he pulled a knife from his belt and cut a deep line across his palm. Blood dripped onto the lens. The glass flared with a faint glow, but it wasn't enough. The creature's head burst through the window, glass raining across the floor. Burke swung the axe, but it only hissed and pulled back, leaving streaks of black. "Slime on the frame." "More," Ellis shouted. Ryan pressed his bleeding hand against the lens, but the glow dimmed again. From below, the keeper's voice rose through the storm. "You'll never have enough. unless one of you gives it all. The lens pulsed weakly, then began to fade, and outside, the first of the creatures crawled onto the rocks. The lighthouse shook like it had been struck by a cannon. The floor under their feet trembled, dust falling from the ceiling. The sound of claws on stone was everywhere now, scratching, scraping, dragging. The creatures were no longer at the shoreline. They were here. Burke stood at the shattered lamp room window, gripping his axe so tightly his knuckles were white. In the mist below, dark shapes climbed the rocks. Some moved like eels, twisting their long bodies up the stone. Others walked on all fours, with limbs too long and bending the wrong way. And all of them had those eyes, pale, glowing, and locked on the lighthouse. The dead lens sat between them, still faintly warm, but fading with each passing second. Ryan's blood had done almost nothing. Ellis looked at the others. The keeper's words echoed in his mind. One of you gives it all. He hated himself for even thinking it, but it was the only way the light could return before the creatures reached them. Downstairs, something slammed into the front door. The iron bolts bent with a loud snap. Lila screamed. They're inside. The sound of wet, heavy footsteps filled the air. The smell of the ocean, sharp, foul, ancient, spread through the lighthouse. Ellis grabbed the knife from Ryan's belt. We don't have time. Mateo backed away. Wait, what are you saying? Ellis's voice was cold. One of us has to feed the lens. All of it. No, Lila shouted. There has to be another way. Burke shook his head, his eyes darting to the stairs. There isn't. Not with them already inside. The first creature appeared in the doorway. It had the shape of a man, almost, but its skin was pale and stretched too tight. Its mouth opened wider than any human mouth should, lined with long, needle-like teeth. It stepped into the room slowly, as if it had all the time in the world. Ryan swung a chair at it, but the creature caught it with one hand and splintered it into pieces like it was nothing. The others backed toward the lens. The creature's head tilted, and it let out a sound halfway between a hiss and a gurgle. From somewhere below, more footsteps echoed, more of them coming up the stairs. Ellis turned to the group. If we don't do this now, none of us will. Make it another minute. The creature lunged. Burke stepped forward, swinging his axe, and buried the blade deep into the thing's shoulder. Black fluid poured out, hissing when it hit the floor. The creature staggered back, shrieking. Ellis seized the moment. He looked at Ryan. You started this. Let me finish it. Ryan froze. What? Before he could react, Ellis grabbed the knife and pressed it into his own palm. This is my crew, my responsibility. Lila's eyes filled with tears. No, don't do this. Ellis didn't listen. He stepped to the lens, placed his bleeding hand against it, and in one swift motion, dragged the blade across his arm. Blood spilled over the glass, pooling at its base. The lens trembled, not like a machine, but like a living thing waking up. A deep hum filled the room, vibrating through the floor. The creatures on the stairs froze. The one with the axe in its shoulder hissed and backed toward the window. Ellis gasped for breath, swaying on his feet. The lens glowed brighter, light swirling inside it like a storm. But it wasn't enough yet. Burke understood what was happening. He stepped forward, placing a hand on Ellis's shoulder. Let me help you finish it. Before Ellis could argue, Burke sliced his own palm and pressed it to the lens. The glow flared, turning from pale white to a blinding gold. The hum grew into a roar. The beam shot out over the ocean, cutting through the storm like fire. The effect was immediate. Every creature in the lighthouse screamed, a high, piercing sound that made glass shatter. They turned, scrambling toward the windows and doors, trying to escape the light. Outside, the ones on the rocks flung themselves back into the water, vanishing beneath the waves. The ocean churned violently, like something enormous was fleeing deep below. The last creature in the room lunged at the lens, but as soon as the light touched it, its skin blackened, cracked, and it collapsed into ash. Ellis staggered back from the lens, pale and trembling. The glow slowly steadied into its normal sweeping beam. The hum settled into a low, constant vibration. The storm outside Bega. The light swept over the water in steady, slow turns. The storm had weakened, but the sea was still restless, waves rolling in as if stirred by something deep below. Ellis sat slumped in the chair, pale from blood loss. Burke wrapped a torn piece of cloth tightly around his arm. Ryan stood at the shattered window, staring out into the mist. "They left," he said, but his voice didn't sound relieved. "They'll be back." Ellis's gaze turned toward the basement door. The keeper's faint laughter still drifted up from below. He had answers to many, maybe, and Ellis was tired of guessing. He stood slowly, leaning on the table for balance. "I'm talking to him," he said. Burke frowned. "You're in no shape." Ellis shook his head. "We need to know what we're dealing with. Otherwise, we're just waiting to die." The basement was warm, damp, and heavy with the smell of old seawater. The keeper sat exactly as before, his wrists still bound by chains. His eyes were bright now, too bright for a man who claimed to be so old. "You fed it well," he said, smiling faintly. "I can feel it." Ellis stepped closer. "What is it? Really?" The keeper tilted his head. "You think it's a light? It's not. It's a mouth. A very old, very hungry mouth." Ryan's brows drew together. "A mouth? You mean it's alive?" The keeper chuckled. "Alive is too small a word. It's older than the island, older than the sea itself. The builders didn't make it. They found it. They built the lighthouse around it to hide it, to feed it without the world noticing." Burke's grip tightened on his axe. "Why? Why? Keep it alive at all?" The keeper's smile faded. "Because the things in the water are worse." Ellis stared at him. "You mean, the creatures we saw? Those things that attacked us?" The keeper nodded slowly. "They are prisoners. That light, that mouth, is the lock. It eats just enough to keep them from breaking through. But if it ever goes hungry too long, they won't just take this island. They'll spread." Ryan's face went pale. "How far?" The keeper's voice dropped. "All the way." A loud thud came from above. Not claws this time, but something heavier, slower. They froze, listening then. Leela's voice called from upstairs. "Ellis, you need to see this." They hurried back up. Leela was standing at the window, pointing toward the sea. The mist had cleared just enough to see the horizon. Something was there. Not a ship, not a creature. Something massive, black against the gray sky. At first it looked like an island, but then it moved. It rose higher from the water, the shape of its back slick and wet, as if it had been submerged for centuries. A low, deep rumble rolled across the waves, making the glass in the windows shake. Mateo swallowed hard. That's not one of them, is it?" The keeper's voice floated up from the stairs behind them. "No, that one's older. It's what they fear." Ellis turned sharply. "Older than them? What is it?" The keeper's eyes seemed to shine in the dim light. "The sea has layers. The deeper you go, the older the things you find. Some are prisoners, some are the jailers." The black shape sank back into the water without a splash, leaving only a long ripple on the surface. Ryan stepped back from the window. "Why are we here, keeper? Why us?" The old man's smile returned, thin and sharp. "Because the mouth was starving. It called for food, and you came." Ellis felt a chill run through him. "You mean, it wanted us here?" The keeper nodded. "It pulls ships off course, brings storms. It has many ways of calling, and when you feed it, you keep the world safe. For a little longer." Another sound came from below. The deep hum of the lens growing slightly louder. The light's beam flared brighter for a moment, as if it had just taken another breath. Ellis looked toward the lamp room, uneasy. How much time did we buy? The keeper's face turned cold. A night. Maybe less. It will wake hungry again before dawn. Ryan's voice cracked. Then what do we do? The keeper shrugged against his chains. You keep feeding it, or you run. Mateo gave a bitter laugh. Run. From this. Where would we go? It's an island. The keeper smiled again. The sea gives, the sea takes. If it wants you to leave, you will. If not, it will keep you. The wind outside picked up, rattling the glass. The mist began to thicken again, curling higher around the tower, and far out on the water. Pale eyes began to appear once more. They weren't retreating this time. They were circling. The mist thickened until the world beyond the glass was gone. The light from the lens swept through it, but instead of clearing the fog, it seemed to make the shapes inside more visible. They were waiting, dozens of them, pale, eyes blinking in unison, moving slowly around the island in a perfect circle. Ellis stood at the window, one hand pressed to the glass. They're not testing us this time, he said quietly. They're surrounding us. Burke checked the axe in his hands. If the light's what's keeping them out, we're fine, right? The keeper's voice floated up from the basement. Stairs. For now. But the light's hunger will return before dawn, and when it fades? He didn't finish the sentence. Ryan turned to Ellis. We can't survive another feeding. Not like before. You almost died. Ellis didn't argue. The cut on his arm was still bleeding through the cloth. The dizziness hadn't left him since Mateo stepped forward. Then we find another way. Something else we can give it. The keeper chuckled. There is nothing else. It only knows life, flesh, blood, yours, or theirs. He nodded toward the window, where the creature's pale eyes glowed in the dark. The sound came first, a soft tapping on the walls. At first it was random, like raindrops. Then it grew louder, sharper, more like claws. It was coming from every direction. Above, below, outside, even beneath the floorboards. The tapping became scraping. The scraping became pounding. The lighthouse shook. Burke shouted over the noise. If they get in, we're finished. Ellis turned to the others. We can't. Feed it again. Not enough of us left. We have to leave the island. Ryan laughed bitterly. You've seen the water. You think a boat is going to get through that? Ellis's eyes narrowed. Then we take the only one that can. The keepers. The old man smiled faintly. You think I have a boat? You've been here 53 years, Ellis said. You've seen storms, attacks, worse than this. You're still alive. You have something. The keeper's silence was answer enough. Ellis grabbed his chains. Where is it? The old man leaned forward until his cloudy eyes were inches from Ellis's. You won't make it. But if you want to try, the tide cave under the east cliff. That's where the sea lets the keeper leave, if it chooses. The pounding on the walls grew frantic, desperate. The creatures were close now, almost breaking through. Ellis turned to the others. We move now. Grab whatever you can carry. Lila shook her head. If we leave, the light will die. They'll get out. The whole world, Ellis cut her off. The whole world isn't my job. My job is keeping us alive. They armed themselves with whatever they could find. The axe, broken chair legs, knives from the kitchen. The keeper watched from his chains, smiling as if he knew the end of the story already. As they reached the door, he called after them. If the sea lets you go, remember this. It's never a gift. It's a trade. The door burst open, the mist flooding in like smoke. Figures moved inside it, tall, pale, bending too far as they crawled over the rocks. Some dropped to all fours. Some stayed upright. All of them moved with the same slow, unnatural rhythm. Ellis led the way down the stone path toward the cliffs. The mist swallowed the world beyond 10 feet. Every sound was muffled, except a soft splash of water somewhere ahead. Then the first one stepped into view. Its body was slick, skin hanging loose over long limbs. Its mouth split too wide, stretching into its neck. Rows of teeth reflected the faint light from the lens. It didn't rush. It simply blocked the path. Burke swung the axe without hesitation. The blade sank into its shoulder, spraying black liquid that hissed as it hit the ground. The creature shrieked, and others answered from the mist. They broke into a run. Shapes followed, shadows sliding just out of reach. One lunged from the left, claws grazing Lila's back before Ryan shoved it away. The roar of the tide grew louder, and then they saw it, the cave mouth at the base of the cliff, half hidden by crashing waves. Inside, tied to a rusted iron ring, was a small, black, wooden boat. Its hull was old, but the wood looked untouched by rot. They piled in as fast as they could, Ellis and Burke pushing it into the water. The moment it floated, a strange current seemed to grab it, pulling it away from the rocks faster than the waves could. The creatures didn't follow into the cave. They stood at the mouth, watching. Some tilted their heads, like they were listening for something. Then, as the boat was pulled into the darkness, every single one of them turned away at once, heading back toward the lighthouse. Ellis looked back. Through the mist, he could still see the faint golden sweep of the light. It was steady. For now, Ryan spoke softly. "Do you think the keeper was lying about the sea letting us go?" Ellis didn't answer. The current carried them faster, the black water swallowing the last sight of the island. But he could still hear the hum of the lens, faint. Even out here, as if it was inside his own chest. Hours later, dawn broke. The sea was calm, the sky pale pink. The island was gone, hidden in the horizon haze. They thought they'd escaped, until Ellis noticed the water at his feet. It was warm, and it was pulsing.